Welcome back. It's time now for the France 24 debate. Today we're turning our attention to Senegal, a country which is often dubbed as a beacon of stability in West Africa. But during the past week, Senegal has been rocked by its worst violence in years, which was sparked by the arrest of the charismatic opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko, who has been charged with rape. Well, Sonko, who is considered to be a serious contender to replace President Macky Sall in 2024, denies the allegations against him. He says the charges are politically motivated. Well, Sonko's arrest sparked clashes last Wednesday, not just in the capital, Dakar, but in other cities across the country. Well, in the days that followed, tensions mounted. At least 5 protesters lost their lives in clashes. Then on Monday, Sonko was released from custody. Well, President Macky Sall has now broken his silence and is striking a more conciliatory note. Here's what he said.
Let us all, together, silence our resentments and avoid the confrontation that leads to the worse. All this positive synergy shows that in moments of doubt, anxiety and turbulence, our social regulators work and the pillars of our nation remain strong. On the judicial aspect of this crisis, let us allow justice to take its course in complete independence.
Okay, well, as President Macky Sall called for the Senegalese people to stand together, the opposition dropped their calls for 3 days of massive demonstrations, although we are now hearing that they are calling for 1 day of demonstrations at least, which is set to happen on Friday. But Sonko says that the seeds of a revolution have nevertheless been sown. Here's what he said.
In our memory, we've never experienced such a crisis in this country. We've gone through many crises, political crises, but we've never experienced something like this.
Okay, so has the potentially explosive situation there in Senegal been diffused or merely delayed? And were there other underlying reasons for the tensions, or was it really just about Sonko's arrest? Those are some of the questions I'll be putting to our guest today. I'm joined here in the studio by Douglas Yates, Professor of African Studies at the American Graduate School in Paris. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for coming to see us again. I'm also joined by Doudou Sidibé, who is a Professor of Political Science at Noviangtia Business School and also President of the RPD-DEFCO, which is a Senegalese political party. Thank you for coming to see us, Professor.
My pleasure.
Now, we'll be speaking as well to Alioune Sall Paloma, who's Executive Director of the African Futures Institute, who joins us from Dakar. Welcome to you. And last but not least, in the Senegalese capital is Sekou Oumar Sy, who is the President of Asidia Consulting. Thank you all very much indeed for speaking to us. Let me begin in Dakar, and I would like to cross to Sekou Oumar Sy and ask, just bring us up to speed on what the latest is in Dakar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us in Dakar today. And we can say today that Dakar is pretty calm after weeks of very tough tensions between the party, the political party in power, Mr. Macky Sall, and the opposition, and mainly Ousmane Sonko. And we've seen yesterday that since he been released, that the tension has really came down and diffused for now, because we've seen also that President Macky Sall has broke his silence and has a more conciliatory tone and understood that the youth that came out with anger, came out because they weren't the political power, and especially the president wasn't listening to their problems and wasn't addressing them directly, because they were going through tough time with the pandemics, going through tough time with immigration issues, finding jobs, and more or less the curfew was going very tough on them. And we know now that the President Macky Sall has a strong signal from the youth, for everybody, especially also from the opposition, that we are now waiting for economical response to take care of this pandemic, but also to take care of our very tough time, and we need jobs. We need to really go back to our normal life.
Thank you for those opening words. Let me stay in Dakar for a moment and cross to Alioune Salpaloma. Thank you for standing by. I mean, a couple of days ago, the headlines were reading things like Senegal on the brink of an apocalypse and Senegal on the edge of a precipice. Is Senegal back from the brink?
Well, I think it will be very difficult to say so in an authoritative manner. It is true that 2 or 3 days ago, one could say that we were at the brink of the apocalypse, and it has been diffused to some extent because, as the previous speaker indicated, the President Macky Sall has adopted a very conciliatory tone, targeting obviously the youth, not exclusively the youth. I think he was also talking to the international community and wanted to reassure the international community that the pillars of Senegalese stability are still strong. But definitely he was targeting the youth and trying to address some of the concern of the youth, including the pandemic and its devastating effects on employment, particularly in the informal sector, where most of the youth are trying to survive. He was trying to address to lift the curfew and things like that. Definitely, he was targeting the youth, and this has effect. It has diffused, so to speak, the threat that was looming ahead 2 or 3 days ago. But definitely, I won't say that it has diffused it. It has probably delayed, given some space for the president to try to recover from all the things that he has been going through these all days. But definitely, the place is still full of danger. Threats are still there, and probably what is expected is more than simply the measures that have been taken by the president and the announcement that he has made. The youth is expecting more. I think they have concern with rule of law. They have concern with deepening of the democratic processes. They have concern with the third term issue, which has been raised and still has not been addressed very clearly by the president. So those are issues that he will have to deal with. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be upsurge sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and those are issues we're going to be looking at in greater detail as the debate continues. But let me just look at the immediate situation, which is, as we understand, developing. And let me ask you, Professor Sidibe, I mean, the opposition group dropped those calls for 3 days of massive protests. So we thought that this dark chapter was over. And now we're hearing that they're saying, let's go ahead with protests on Friday. I mean, what do we read into this?
I think that, they would like to maintain the pressure on the president to make sure that he will hold his promises, okay? And others would want to have Sonko totally free of charges, okay? This is what they ask. That is why they decided maybe to do as a protest, okay? I think that also a lot of Senegalese were afraid that our democracy, we strive to have, slip it into our hands, okay? And we were afraid also to shift from rule of law to rule by law. That is why they maintain such pressure. And we saw in the past that the president arrested a lot of activists, a lot of crusaders, and there was a suspicion of, eliminating some incumbent, okay? And they are afraid that, Ousmane Sonko will be some of them. That is why they maintain this pressure to see how the president will behave in the future, if he will hold very quickly his promises that my two colleagues said, meaning to implement, to address the issues of employment, the issue of, improving the liberty, democracy, and so on. We are very fond of. Senegalese are very fond of democracy. Okay, this is my point of view.
So lots of underlying issues, not just the issue of Sonko, but perhaps that was the last straw for many of the people who've been taking to the streets. Let's come back to some of those thoughts. I'd like to ask you, Professor Yates, for kind of a macro picture? Because you know the region well, you know Senegal well, you've talked about it considerably on this channel. And we do tend to think, don't we, of Senegal as being this beacon of stability in that region of Africa, in West Africa. We haven't seen anything like this, though, in years, have we?
No, and there's good reasons to believe that Senegal will pull out of this crisis. Why is Senegal a consolidated democracy? It's never had a coup d'etat. You've never had a military junta. And although there are protests in the streets, it's not a revolution. It's not even an insurrection. So it's people being very mad. And it's exceptional, but I think it's a perfect storm that comes out of the conjugation of several elements. Like, why now? Why not last year? People who say it's COVID. Well, why not last year? So COVID is present. People are locked up 9 o'clock at night. In the urban areas like Dakar, a lot of the small businessmen, the petit bourgeois who own bars and restaurants and merchants are suffering. There's a lot of unemployed youths. But why didn't it happen last year if it was just COVID? And it's clear, if Sall had not been ambiguous about running for re-election in 2024, I don't think this would be happening. And he would have perhaps even been able to have had Sonko arrested, and it would have been accepted. But because he's been so ambiguous on whether or not he's going to run for re-election in 2024, the people don't trust him, and they're beginning to read into all of his behavior an Abdoulaye Wade third-term campaign. And I think that was the match that sparked these riots.
Okay, thanks for that. And just another thing that sort of added to that perfect storm, and this is something I'd like to put to our guests in Dakar, is the fact that the riot police there in Senegal, they used tear gas, rubber bullets, very heavy-handed tactics. And I'm wondering if there's a perception that they made matters much worse for themselves by taking that very hardline approach, cutting off social media, limiting access to the internet. What are your thoughts, Sheikh Umar Say?
Yes, during this confrontation between the youth and the police and the force in general, they were using really very tough tear gas, and we were hearing really that they trying to control the situation. The overwhelming power of the youth, and let me be clear, because I heard the Minister of Justice saying on France 24 yesterday, that was the wrestlers that didn't have no more way to do their games, and they did not engage from wrestler. That's why they are on the street. That's not true at all. The way they came out and the reason they came out and the angle with that they came out was very tough for the policemen to hold them. And you saw that they were attacking mainly Auchan and gas stations. And then we still have one of the main leaders like Guy Marisagne is still in prison. That's why maybe also they're trying to do another protest on Friday, and also still leaders in the prison. They trying to put the pressure, but the way that was handled, I think, and I started when they taking Ousmane Sonko to the judge, and people saw through the internet, to the Facebook, through other that there was a problem handling him to take him to the judge, and they didn't really like it, and some of them thought that he was handcuffed and started to come out, and I think that also put a fire on the situation. But let us remind that this situation may be specific for now for Africa, but it may have for Senegal, but it may have a ripple effect in other part of Africa, because whether we don't have actually means to print our own money, and since the pandemic started, we think that the EU, the IMF, and other institution should really think about canceling the debt, because it's starting to be really heavy on Africa. And the last year, and I heard one of the guests saying, why not last year? Because we remind people that last year was the president put a lot of money on the table to try to help the more affected people by the pandemic. But this second outbreak of pandemic, the state level didn't bring anything out. And I think the president also wasn't very well speaking with his population. And the last straw was also when he said, if you don't come out and take the vaccination, I will just give it away to other countries in Africa. And people think that was very bad communication from him, and they didn't like it at all. And I think that also showed was one of the main reasons that they wanted to show. We elected you. You're not in power to just decide whatever you want. Keep telling you that this is a tough time for us. And let's say also really that in the background, the third term was really saying in the mind of a lot of folks that we may be going with them on that road.
Okay, let me stay in Dakar. I'd like to ask Alioune Salpaloma a question about, did anyone see this coming? I mean, if we put the clock back 10 days, were there any signs, even before Sonko's arrest, that some serious unrest was on the cards? Did you have that in mind?
I think that one could read the thing. The reading was on the wall to some extent. Because you see, what has been happening is that I guess since the re-election of the president for a second term, there has been signs of weakening of the kind of contract, the social contract, and lack of confidence between the various protagonists of the political scene. And we've also seen more and more violent way of solving contradiction within the party, or the dominant party, within the party of the president, as well as contradiction between the power structure and those who are in the opposition. Just to give an example, it was made very clear by the president that whoever within his party dare to discuss the issue of third term will be out. So there was very clear sign that no internal democracy. This is not something to be discussed. It was also made very clear by the president and the hardliners that whoever shows any interest for competing for the presidential post will be out. And the last cabinet reshuffle, which has seen some major contenders, major players in the presidential party, along with the cancellation of the position of prime minister, was a clear indication that the president was in charge, is in charge, and wants to be seen in charge of everything else, of everything. And therefore, this tendency for authoritarianism is something that could only come with some kind of backlash, create some kind of resistance within the party. And this is why the president was seen as being very lonely all these days. He had to step in. The Minister of Home Affairs, Minister de l'Intérieur, was not good enough to meet the expectation of the people, because the president is the only one who definitely has the power to say something that can be accepted or that can be listened to by the people. So this evolution towards a kind of authoritarian regime could only trigger resistance. And the same thing in the relationship between the power and the opposition. Definitely, there has been something about what is called the judiciarization of the political competition. If Sonko had been left in jail, he would have been the third potential candidate to presidential election to get to be ousted by law. So rather than having rule of law, we have rule by law, and dealing with political opposition using the judicial apparatus. So there has been a problem with that. And this has been triggering lack of confidence, breakdown of confidence between the citizenry and the people.
All right, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there for the first half of the France 24 debate. You've had the last word of the first half, Alioune Salpaloma. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Don't go away. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. We're looking at the situation in Senegal, a country often dubbed as a beacon of stability in West Africa. But during the last few days, it's been anything but stable. There's been a deadly violence in the country. And now the opposition is calling for fresh protests on Friday. Just before the break, we were talking about the economic hardships faced by many Senegalese people. And listening to what the President Macky Sall had to say earlier, he seems to take that on board and that he acknowledges the suffering of the Senegalese people at this very difficult time. Let's listen to what he had to say.
That a generation faced with so much hardship expresses its unhappiness is quite understandable to me. At the same time, let's avoid participating in anything that delays us in the quest for a better future. When you ransack a business, when you attack the good of others, you don't create jobs, you destroy them. You don't reduce poverty, you make it worse.
Okay, the president of Senegal acknowledging that the people of Senegal have indeed faced considerable hardship. Professor Yates, I mean, until last Wednesday, do you get the impression that people in Senegal were going about their business more or less as usual, given the restrictions that they faced, given the curfew and other pandemic restrictions? Was it sort of business as usual in the country?
Well, I wouldn't describe it that, particularly because the pandemic has so fundamentally changed things, but I do believe that there was stability, that there were two trajectories that have been going on. So in Macky Sall's first term, there was 6% annual growth. That was really remarkable. He had new economic zones, trains, infrastructure. He had sort of put an end to Abdoulaye Wade's grand projects of prestige like his statue. But then came the second term, and came COVID, came the Trump era with the crisis in world trade, and that hurt, that stunted growth. So the first thing that's happened is overall, there's been less growth in Senegal. But the second thing was, and the IMF did a report during Sall's first term, while growth was going up, inequality was also going up. And so there was a great inequality between the rural areas and the urban areas. And what the IMF found was that within households, 15% of all the inequality in Senegal was between the young people in households and the older ones. And I think part of what's happened is these young people find themselves, they can't go out at night, they don't have jobs. The COVID sort of brought out all of the bad things in society. And the people out on the streets, those are young people. I'd say for them, it's not business as usual.
Let me ask you, Professor Sidibe, I mean, a general sense of anger there in Senegal at the status quo. But would you agree with what Professor Yates is saying, that up until fairly recently, the government has performed quite well in delivering economic growth? It's just been in more recent years that things have been a bit more difficult.
Yeah, frankly speaking, it is true, you know. Before the pandemic, the GDP was a bit, high, amounting to 6%, okay? Because of the stability of the country, and that can enable, Senegal to attract FDI, okay? And Macky Sall had, grand projet, as you said, and everything was going well. And don't forget that we discover oil as well, This is part of, the factors of the FDI are coming in Senegal, okay? But when the pandemic came, he should maybe do more to try to maintain, what can be done, okay?
Okay, and you mentioned oil, which implies there's money, and you've got 40% of the population living in poverty. So there must be a huge sense of inequality in society.
Exactly. It is what I wanted to point out, is that, in spite of this, growth, we have around 45% of the population, living in poverty. They did not enjoy this growth. And it's really contradictory. And some people, economists, I'm not one, but economists are trying to analyze this while saying that, because all the profits will go back to outside, That is why the people will not enjoy it. They will not stay in Senegal. Okay, the economy depends on foreign companies that are investing, and they take their profit out of Senegal. Okay, this is the explanation. Okay, but Macky Sall should work in order to have these profits. Some part of these profits stay in the country and have these people, these 45%, enjoy it. Properly.
Okay, so there's a sense of injustice.
Injustice, exactly.
Okay, so that's the state of the Senegalese economy. There are haves and have-nots. There are people living in abject poverty, youth unemployment. So there's this split between the young and the old. One other thing, a subject we haven't talked about really very much, which is surprising, his name has hardly come up at all actually, is of course Sonko, the opposition figurehead. And I'd like to ask our guests in Dakar what people actually make of those charges against Sonko. Do they believe that he did indeed rape the person that he's alleged to have raped? Or do people think these charges against him are, as he says, purely politically motivated? Let me put that to one of our guests in Dakar. Let me start with you, Sheikhu Omar Sai.
Thank you very much. I think most of the people, what they think most about this Sonko gate with the young lady called Adisa, they mostly think that it's a complot, and so say that Sonko early on quickly said this is something that Macky Sall is behind. Well, he made it, he turned it in a political way, so that he said, see, this is how he worked to make sure that Khalifa Sall is out of the loop for the election of 2019. Now he's coming after me because I'm the second after that. Idrissa Seck is no longer among the opposition. I'm the second one, and he is fearing that I may be taken over when he will try to run for 2024. But still, Sonko will still have to explain a lot of other people while he was there beyond the curfew at 9 o'clock. What did happen really between him and Adisa? Because when this story started, it was a private story, and it was just somebody fighting against rape. People don't think that the rape really happened, but only the justice would have been able to make sure that this rape happened, and they have a proof of that. But it went so fast, and also on the other side of justice, the Senegalese has so much doubt about the justice system, and they have no more confidence about the institution and the way that Macky Sall used it against the political leaders. So Sonko was able quickly to turn it over against Macky Sall and said that I'm telling you, Senegalese people, there is nothing between me and Adisa that happened that I raped her. And also, I'm telling you all today, in the face of the world, that Macky Sall is trying to bring me down. And it went straight to the youth, like a strong message. It went to a lot of households that Macky Sall is up to something again. And since he didn't clearly state that he's not running for 2024 for a third term, that also started to take over the place, like, this is not just, he cannot do it again, and we will try to help him to stand against that. That's why when Ousmane Sonko called people to resist against the oppression, the youth started coming over his house, and they followed him to Instagram, to Facebook, and other media tools, and made it their own issue against Macky Sall, against the justice, despite the fact that Macky Sall told in France 24, I think, that he doesn't have nothing about that. There were a lot of clues, and that's showing this is not very something that is, the power, the political power is is not behind that. And Sonko, with his communication team, with his lawyers, tried very hard to sell, to market to the people, listen, we need to stand up against this injustice again. We need to stand up to stop Macky Sall from trying to destroy Sonko, and people voted.
Okay.
And now Sall come out very, very bad out of it.
Let's get your opinion, Professor Sidibe. I mean, has President Macky Sall done anything in the past that would make people think it was plausible or likely he was simply trying to torpedo one of his most serious opponents?
As I said in my introduction, there is a kind of suspicion, of that, what you said, okay? Because we saw, the trial of Karim Wade, okay, who was a potential candidate who was able to win the game, a serious incumbent. And we also saw Khalifa Sall in the same position. But what makes us doubting is before the election, he said that after the election, I will freeze them, I will give them, kind of, not amnesty, but a kind of grace, what we call grace, okay? And it is exactly what he did, Why not doing that before, to allow them to participate in the election, okay? This just, show us maybe it was just to eliminate this candidate. That is why Sonko as well is afraid of that, and he is resisting and asking also his supporters to resist in order to participate in the coming election in 2024. And, hopefully, he thinks that hopefully he can win, but, one never know, we are far from 2024, everything can happen,
Sure. And let's get an opinion from Dakar as well, from Alioune Salpaloma. I mean, I'm just wondering, Sonko is hugely popular amongst the younger generations there in Senegal. And I'm just wondering whether you feel you've got a sense that these allegations that he faces have been damaging to that level of popularity that he enjoys, or perhaps on the contrary, perhaps this has worked to his advantage in some way. What are your thoughts?
I think that these allegations are not damaging at all to his image, because after all, he is seen as having won a battle, having resisted, and having won the first round at least, because he is finally out of jail. He never went to jail. He is free under judiciary control, but he is free. So that hasn't damaged his image. In fact, the allegation have never damaged his image, because he's been clever enough to present the whole thing as politically motivated. The story, as it looks like, you have two narratives which are woven around the notion of plot. Sonko has been very sharp and presented the whole thing as a plot to torpedo a political opponent. And he did recall the recent history of Senegal, the case of Karim Wade and Khalifa Sall, to say, I'm not going to be the sacrificial lamb, and I want the people to understand that what is at stake is nothing private. It is a political initiative to torpedo a potential candidate. The power has not been able to come up with a counter narrative, except to say, when it became hot, that in fact the violence were manipulated, they were triggered by terrorists, and therefore calling the protester terrorist, with all the connotation that it has, negative connotation that it has. So the image of Sonko has not been damaged by all. It is a narrative against another narrative. That's where we stand for the time being. Now, the comparative advantage of Sonko is twofold. One is the precedent, as I say, of Karim Wade and Khalifa Sall. The other comparative advantage he has is the fact that government has been very clever in dealing with this issue of so-called levée de l'immunité parlementaire, basically withdrawing the immunity he enjoyed as member of the parliament. It has been argued by lawyers that the procedures, the laws and regulations pertaining to such removal of protection have not been followed through. And therefore, there has been some kind of violation of the rights of Sonko as MP. So all this to say, just to say that for the time being, Sonko seems to be the winner of the party.
Okay, thanks for that analysis. I mean, let's change tack entirely. Something Sonko has been saying. He's been quite critical of the leadership of Macky Sall because of what he says is over-dependence on France. France, of course, a former colonial power of Senegal. What's he getting at here, Professor Yates?
Well, all right. So I'll take the bait for that. So among the youth, the disgruntled youth, it is a widespread belief that the elderly elite generations have been instrumentalized by France. Whether that's true or not, the belief itself is a political reality. And everything that France does, everyone that France supports, so Macron and Sall met in August, can be viewed in that light. Now, France does have a long and deep relationship with Senegal, and that relationship was severely challenged during the last years of Abdoulaye Wade. When he was clinging to power, he began to play this populist card. And so it's always available because France controls the money of Senegal. France has control over media, publications. It's got significant trade relations. France is deeply implicated. But I think that becomes a political tool rather than a nuanced analysis.
Okay, well, thank you for taking that question. It's a tricky one there. The Senegalese constitution, of course, doesn't permit 3 successive terms by any president, but there seem to be suspicions that Macky Sall is gearing up to do as other West African presidents like Guinea's Alpha Condé or Ivory Coast's Alassane Ouattara have done and change the constitution. Let's listen to what Sonko had to say about this issue of a 3rd term.
We demand that Macky Sall declares publicly and without ambiguity that this yes or no game is over. We have a president who neither says yes nor no, depending on what he wants. But this isn't a monarchy, is it? He should declare publicly and without ambiguity, and the people demand it, that in 2024 he will pack his bags and he will leave, one way or another.
Okay, so the opposition leader Sonko, they're saying he wants an assurance from President Macky Sall that he won't run for a 3rd term. Let me turn to you, Professor Sidibe. 2024, that's when the next presidential election is due to take place. Are we likely, in your opinion, to see 59-year-old President Macky Sall's name on the ticket?
Normally, no. Macky Sall is trying to maintain what we call a constructive ambiguity. What does it mean? It means that, I will not clarify the debate that the Constitution already clarifies, because the Constitution says anyone cannot do more than 2 terms, okay? And himself, he put this in the Constitution in order to settle the problem created by the former president Abdoulaye Wade. But when he got his 2nd term, now he's saying that, we'll no longer talk about it, meaning not talking about it means that I can do it, I cannot do it, okay? But he should clarify the debate, saying that, I will not be a candidate for 2004, and then let others, he will organize, free elections and let candidates, partake in these elections, okay? It's not up to him, to say what we should do, but the Constitution does, okay?
Okay, we're almost completely out of time. Just the last word. Reporters said on Monday that when Sonko was released, the mood turned from anger to celebration. I just want to ask you lastly, you have the last word. Is that mood going to be maintained, or are we about to see more unrest? Your prediction?
I think that if Macky Sall, hold his promise, okay, everyone will come down, okay? Maybe until the next round, because there will be a next round, because Sonko is not totally free from charge, okay? And one never know how his supporters will behave when he will be, asked to come back and see the judge.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Thank you. You've had
You're
the last word, Professor Dudu Sidibe. Thank you very much to you. Thank you as well to Professor Douglas Yates. Thank you to our two guests in Dakar, Alion San Paloma and Sheikhu Omar Sai. Thank you both very much indeed. And thank you to you for watching the France 24 debate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Where did the